we have hinted and suggested that we are writing up team previews for every single team, all 32 franchises, up on Rotoworld right now. We're about halfway through. Yes, halfway through. So we thought at this midway mark, halftime, we would kind of pause. Each of us have written a handful of them. I've only written 2, but list some takeaways, the most important facts about some of the things that we have learned, because as Hayden mentioned in the last show, you know, so often we look at it from a player perspective when looking at ADP and fantasy rankings, so on and so forth. But understanding the team aspect and the team cohesion and chemistry really brings a different element to this. I'm sure, Hayden, you've thought of that exact same idea when writing your previews so far.
Yeah, definitely. It's just you have to nail the quarterback and then his receivers in that order, and then figure out the running game as well. And it all kind of ties in like how strong you think the team will be, how often they're going to be trailing, how often they're going to be passing the ball when they're trailing, all these different things that come into play. And you basically have to project every single one of those. And if you're wrong on even a little aspect of that, you can throw the whole equation out the window.
Yeah. And what they do when they're trailing, what they do when they're leading, how many targets, how many touches are still on the table, and maybe most importantly, what these potential new offenses will look like with maybe new players around them or new play callers. And it's all a projection, but this really does make us focus on a single team. Okay, since we have this outlined, we're going to hit on 5 teams today. And Patrick Bennett Doherty, why don't you go first? Hit us with one.
Well, the first thing I learned is I need to assign myself better teams. I've so far written up the Jaguars, Broncos, Bears, and the Cardinals, one of my favorites. But I'll say my main takeaway so far, revelation, if you will, is that maybe I've been being a little hard on Gardner Minshew. I thought people had kind of I thought Minshew was kind of more meme than like actual prospect, and I still think that is probably the case. But like when you dig underneath the hood, I don't know if I realized just quite how solid his rookie season was. His 21 touchdowns were tied for the 8th most amongst rookies this century since 2000. Same's true of his quarterback rating. Amongst the 54 quarterbacks to make at least 8 starts this century, he threw the 4th fewest picks with 6. Kind of showed surprising athleticism with his legs, 344 yards rushing. It was the 5th most amongst all quarterbacks last season and the 11th most amongst all rookies this century. And just that, the arm will not blow you away necessarily with Gardner Minshew. But, I mean, he does have 2 things that you cannot teach. He has poise and he has moxie. That's all we ever look for, of course, is the intangibles. I don't care at all about stats or measurables at all.
You're hurting me over here, Pat.
Yeah. But yeah, basically just that I maybe have been a little too dismissive of Gardner Minshew, and maybe a little less surprised that the Jags, who were kind of stuck in neutral to begin with, maybe a little less surprised now that they're giving him this 2nd season. They weren't going to once they decided they weren't going to get a quarterback in the draft. I was just kind of baffled by the Jags' complacency at quarterback this offseason, but I understand it a little more after digging more under the hood with Gardner Minshew.
Yeah, there's kind of 2 sides to this, Pat. There is the part that I definitely am with you, that Gardner Minshew through stretches of last season, one, wasn't even a player any of us were even considering as like an actual NFL talent heading into last year, but also looked like a competent quarterback. And there were times like on a week-to-week basis when I was writing this up that he outplayed Kyler Murray in those weeks. Like he has a comfort in chaos. And I don't think that that's something that you can necessarily teach. Like when a play breaks down, he absolutely wants to make something happen. But hey, the other aspect of this is that the Jaguars have the lowest projected win total in the NFL, right? Like there is the aspect of, is this team really trying to win in 2020? I mean, they have kept Doug Marrone for so long, and I don't think it would be a shock to any of us if Jay Gruden, who is now the offensive coordinator, comes in and maybe picks up this team as his own team halfway through the year. But that doesn't disregard, potential exciting players and exciting games and exciting moments that this team can have.
Yeah, assuming Jay Gruden can survive the rumors that are circulating on the internet right now, I think we can expect the Jaguars to play a little bit better on offense, just simply because Doug Marrone's not going to have as much of a stranglehold on the offense. I did an analytics rankings where I looked at all the offenses on how how often they're passing, how they're running, all the things that the analytics want to do. And the Jaguars shockingly ranked 31st out of my rankings. I think that Jake Gruden would bring a little bit of a little more pizzazz to the offense. Hopefully we don't get Leonard Fournette just running it up the middle as often. And hopefully we're not getting all these Leonard Fournette checkdowns. I don't care which stat you look at. Leonard Fournette was probably the worst targeted player last season. And just having Chris Thompson there, maybe Laviska Shenault does something that Gardner Minshew has a little bit better of a chance. But like you said, this is still probably going to be the worst team or one of the bottom 3 worst teams in the league this year.
So, Pat, let me ask you this, because DJ Chark emerged as a legitimate number 1 wide receiver in the NFL last season. I think he absolutely maintains that role this year. Is there anyone else in this offense? I mean, Gardner Minshew can be a spot starter, a streaming option. But other than that, Dede Westbrook had his moment in this spotlight last offseason. I don't think any of us really get excited about drafting Leonard Fournette. Chris Thompson has history. I keep saying these names, but Pat, is it really just DJ Chark as someone who you're potentially excited about?
More or less. I mean, Chris Conley is another guy, or if you dig a little beneath the surface, is maybe a little more impressive than you would have guessed or realized last year. But the targets, there's just not going to be enough targets there for him, to make a real fantasy impact. I wasn't going to get excited about anybody. I guess maybe be Raquel Armstead, just because we know, hey, at the bare minimum, the Jaguars are not going to be funneling these go nowhere targets to Leonard Fournette again. 100 just totally wasted targets last year. They told anyone who would listen they wanted to trade him this offseason. The lights are blinking red that they want to be done with Leonard Fournette. Didn't exercise his 5th-year team option, and he's just going to be on a much, much shorter leash this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if Raquel Armstead has a role, from the jump, basically. And if Leonard Fournette runs and catches like he did last year, they're going to start giving away some of those touches. And I love Raquel Armstead as kind of a late round hedge, and not even necessarily just as like a potential upside or running back who could, especially in the second half of the season, maybe be like an RB2 or 3 for you, depending on how things go.
Josh, how's it going with Divine Ozigbo? Is he still alive out here?
That's friend of the podcast, Divine Ozigbo. Right. And look, he got some touches towards the end of last season. This team is so up in the air that so many storylines we can guess that they might happen. But one is like Leonard Fournette's not on this team halfway through next season. And he could be traded in training camp. I mean, there's a chance he's not even on the team in week 1. I mean, that's probably unlikely, but right. I mean, the Jaguars they couldn't have made it clear that they're ready to move on from this. They gave it all they were going to give it, and they're ready to move on from the Leonard Fournette experiment. One final name, Hayden. We talk so much about tight ends this offseason, yet I feel like half the NFL audience does not even realize that Tyler Eifert is on this team. What if we get 16 games of Tyler Eifert back with Jay Gruden?
Then he'll finish as the tight end 18 overall. It'd be great.
Don't forget about Josh Oliver, a worky washout, top 70 pick last year. Maybe hold on to him in dynasty leagues for another year at tight end. Chenault's going to be fascinating because this team has basically said he's an offensive weapon.
That's maybe a red flag. Well, what if – okay, here the one case
don't work out.
Chenault is – what if they get in the red zone and they just want to use his big frame and wildcat? That's exactly what Colorado did. There was a lot of goal line carries, a lot of short yardage, and he was super effective on that stuff. Maybe that's one way to get Leonard Fournette out of the offense is, hey, it's 3rd and 2. Now we're bringing in Laviska Shenault. Maybe. Shenault, he's a very intriguing talent, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be kind of beating a dead horse. I've said it a lot on this podcast and other podcasts, but offensive weapons, in general, have a very difficult time being integrated into offenses. And just this year, the Corona year, where there were 0 offseason reps of any kind, it's just going to be doubly difficult for people like Shenault to carve out a role. And yeah, I would have very low expectations for the Buffalo. He reminds me a lot of Cordero Patterson without an athletic profile, and so I'm not sure what to do with that. I know every player is different, but that was the profile that he reminded me of. Okay, next team, since you spent so much time, more than this entire offseason on the Jaguars. Hayden Winks, you're up next. All right, we'll go to a team that actually matters, the Baltimore Ravens. And when I was writing about the Ravens a couple of weeks ago, the big thing that kept jumping out to me is that this offense is going to be passing the ball more so than they did last year. They were only trailing at 19% of their offensive snaps last season. That was the best in the NFL. They were also leading on 60% of their offensive snaps. That was also the best in the NFL. So I think just like with regression in general, that Lamar Jackson is probably going to throw around 440 to 460 pass attempts next year. Last year, he was only at 400. They were last in team dropback. So I think that regardless, we're going to see the Ravens pass the ball more. And that's great news for Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews. And with Marquise Brown, he only played 3 games last season where he played 75% of the snaps or more. And then Mark Andrews only ran a route on 61% of the Ravens dropbacks. So I think that you're going to get more passing volume and you're going to get the best playmakers, hopefully, on the field more.
And I agree, there's going to be more Ravens passing volume. And, we take it as like an article of faith that Lamar Jackson's going to have touchdown regression, and he probably will, and probably even rushing yardage regression. But he has so much room to grow in the passing yards department, in the passing volume department, that could offset a lot of this natural expected regression. Maybe not make him, not that people are expecting him to tumble in fantasy, but it really kind of offset some of this regression that we're all expecting.
The Mark Andrews situation is interesting because you mentioned it, Hayden. He basically played the same amount of snaps that Hayden Hurst did last year. And that's a team that was exciting when they used 3 tight ends because they would, bunch them together if they were in a personnel grouping that allowed for it in terms of smaller defensive groupings. And then they would spread you out and still throw the football with 2 great receiving tight ends. They don't really have another receiving tight end on the roster now. So I'd expect so many more of those targets and those opportunities to be funneled to Mark Andrews. But we talk about passing volume gaining this year for Lamar Jackson. But is it really going to be resulting in another passing option really succeeding in this offense? Because I don't think so. Like, I still think it's Marquise Brown. I still think it's Mark Andrews. And, you're going to have some games of Miles Boykin. You might have some games of Devin Duvernay. Who knows what else? But that's not really – and maybe we miss on someone, right? Maybe this is an offense that is so good with a quarterback that is so good that it's difficult to peg that 1/3 option in the passing game. If you could mention one, Hayden, who would it be?
Well, I think you have to look at the running backs. Maybe J.K. Dobbins taking on a little bit more of a receiving role, but I don't think that is going to be Lamar Jackson's style. He's going to be jumping off to the flats to his running backs. So he's just going to rather be scrambling. I think the biggest thing is that we're going to see a jump from like Marquise Brown as like a wide receiver 3, where he's being drafted into like the wide receiver 2 mix, or Mark Andrews jumps into the George Kittle, into the Travis Kelce tier, where he becomes a 2nd-round pick next year. I think that's the most likely thing, just because Miles Boykin, Willie Snead, Devin Duvernay, they're just completely, really just unproven talents at this point.
Yeah, it is a big talking point. We've all talked about this offseason, how the Ravens didn't check down. That probably won't change, but there probably will be a few more running back targets this year. And Nick Boyle is not like an amazing pass catching talent, but he has been involved as a pass catcher for the Ravens. So it's not like he's going to be fantasy viable, but it wouldn't be shocking to see like 25 receptions for Nick Boyle even. So Hayden, I think, hit the nail on the head. It's just going to be more the core talents getting more looks, and the goodness really not spreading down to like a clear 3rd option.
I should, suggest the elephant in the room is the scarf that I have on, by the way. Aston Villa is currently playing a match right now that they need to win. But my focus is all on you guys. My focus is entirely on you. It's not on the iPad right next to me right now. Okay, let's move on. I'll go
Very unprofessional.
I'm always super professional, Pat. You know that in whatever I do. I want to talk about the Houston Texans. Houston Texans are a team where they have Thanos as their head coach, GM, whatever you want to call it. And this is a team that in the last 2 years has traded away Jadeveon Clowney. I should even say the last year. Carlos Hyde, they've acquired. Kenny Stills acquired. Laramie Tunsil acquired. Gary and Conley, all in trades. They hired this character coach in Jack Easterby, who even knows what his role is, but he's now like the vice president of football operations. More roster turnover, obviously, this season with DeAndre Hopkins leaving, bringing in David Johnson, his $11 million cap, but trading a 2nd-round pick for Brandon Cooks. What I'm trying to say is, rarely does a team have that much turnover and changeover and a new look in multiple seasons. And the Texans did it in one off season. And that's because there are no checks and balances here with Bill O'Brien. But with that said, he still thought low enough about their offensive output that he changed their play caller. He is no longer the play caller. Nids is this guy named Tim Kelly now, who I also learned is brothers of right tackle of the Titans, Dennis Kelly. But Tim Kelly's never called plays in the NFL. So I guess my biggest question is, what is this offense going to be? What is this offense going to look like? And I can kind of see what the Texans are doing based on their personnel, right? Like, you add another vertical passer in Brandon Cooks to go along with Will Fuller, who's insane production when he plays with Deshaun Watson. So the goal is to maximize Watson, who was number 2 deep ball throw in the NFL last year with a 54% completion rate adjusted. And then you bring in Randall Cobb, who basically had the same average depth of target last year as DeAndre Hopkins. And then you hopefully improve at running back with David Johnson, the offensive line that is more healthy with Titus Howard here. And I think I have uncovered what the goal is with this Houston Texans offense. But Hayden, at the end of the day, they're also projected for almost 3 fewer wins this year than they had last year.
Yeah, on offense, this is just going to be the Madden offense. 4 verts, Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller. Hopefully they stay healthy. Kenny Stills, all going downfield. And if they're not open, then Deshaun Watson's going to scramble. I think Deshaun Watson's probably going to have a career high in rushing yards. If you look at what his splits when the Texans are trailing and then when they're leading, he runs the ball a lot more. So I think that Deshaun Watson himself is going to be more than fine fantasy quarterback, a top 5 option. It's just, can they get the receivers to stay healthy? And I just think that there really is no plan outside of Deshaun Watson is a elite quarterback, and they're just going to run with that.
Yeah, are they going to out the Cardinals with 4 receiver sets? They didn't need to trade DeAndre Hopkins to do it, but the Texans do for somehow now have one of the deeper, maybe arguably more interesting receiver groups in the NFL. Because like you said, they could have the 2 burners on the outside. They could have Randall Cobb and Kiki Cutie doing work over the middle. They have Kenny Stills, who can do both. Tim Kelly is completely unproven as a play caller, but Josh, you and I have talked many times about how Bill O'Brien made like easy things look difficult the past few years for the Texans. Somehow he made having Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins appear difficult. Like that was a difficult connection last year, using DeAndre Hopkins kind of almost like Julian Edelman. And so they needed a shakeup. At least credit to Bill. He did realize that they needed some sort of play calling shakeup. And I mean, it's an interesting, that could be a euphemism for like nonsensical, but it's an interesting offense. And it's very hard to know what to expect, but we could get a career high. I mean, by far, not this. Hayden said rushing for Deshaun Watson. We could get a career high passing volume, like not even close. He could like blow it out of the water,
right? Based
on the way the offense is constructed right now. And they have 2 of the best pass catching backs in the NFL, David Johnson and Duke Johnson.
But the other part of that, Pat, is that Deshaun Watson just like does not target his backs at all. And I wonder if that's the aspect that Tim Kelly is going to work on, are manufacturing these layup throws over the middle. Because like how often, and this is not analytically based at all, but how often did you watch this Texans team, especially towards the end of last year, and see easy middle of the field open targets like Jimmy Garoppolo gets, like Jared Goff gets? It seems like Deshaun Watson never got those, and he always had to work off his primary read. And then maybe part of that, though, Pat, is that he just doesn't use his checkdowns either, right? Like Carlos Hyde,
running quarterbacks, a scramble, it functions as a check down in a lot of ways.
Right, but their 1,000-yard rushing back only had 16 targets last year, and Duke Johnson, who still is one of the best passing down backs in the NFL, saw a career low in targets last season as well. So maybe, again, Tim Kelly's job, who apparently he's super close with Deshaun, is unlocking these new aspects of his game. And maybe because of that, we see, a Deshaun Watson who is able to take the easy as well as create magic. And if so, then he absolutely will finish top 5 among quarterbacks this season, even without DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, so even with DeAndre Hopkins, without DeAndre, kind of the takeaway is we don't really need to be fading Deshaun Watson. There's still a lot to work with here for him in fantasy.
Okay, we are at just over the halfway point. Again, if these excite you, which I don't know why they would not excite you, go and check out all of our team previews. I know Nick is writing them as well. I know Daigle is writing them as well. Again, we're halfway through. And so we're just, continuing to pepper a few of the notable notes that we found along the way. Pat, we're back to you. Circle back to you.
The Denver Broncos, Josh, as everyone knows, the offseason talking point was what the Denver Broncos did in the draft and the way they're kind of like surprisingly but correctly orienting their offense around Drew Lock and Drew Lock's kind of unique ability down the field. It's always shocking when you see an NFL team actually try to like build around a player's strengths, but that's what the Broncos are doing. But so yeah, all the focus on Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler. But what really stood out to me studying the Broncos was, Noah Fant might be even more ready to explode than we realize. I was talking about Gardner Minshew's rookie stats. I mean, Fant's 562 yards last year were the 15th most by a tight end since the AFL-NFL merger in 1970. His 14.1 yards per catch were 13th most. And this was with 3 different quarterbacks, kind of none of them good last year. And, a friend of the podcast, Mr. Matt Kelly, playerprofiler.com. I think we all probably love his best comparable tool. Noah Fant's best comparable is George Kittle. And, it's a first-round tight end who came out, with a playmaking reputation, came in the NFL, immediately made plays, and not a good situation, not a good setup last year. And basically it was who we thought he was. And it's not like he's flying under the radar, but just not a whole lot of Noah Fant talk, I feel like, this offseason. And he's someone who could just be ready to explode.
Yeah, when I was I'm doing these video recaps as well for these team previews, and when I was going through your Broncos preview, the Noah Fant paragraph was the one that stood out to me the most. Just how elite of a talent this guy really is, and what his upside could be if he gets the volume. And that's where I keep coming back to with the Broncos is who's going to be truly calling the offense. Is Vic Fangio going to let this offense be a downfield passing attack? Are they going to stop running the ball as much as they did last season? Even last year, they were 29th in offensive plays, 28th in scoring. Unless that changes, players like Noah Fant, like Jerry Jeudy, and like someone like Phillip Lindsay, Melvin Gordon, they're going to be kind of just restricted on how much of a fantasy ceiling they can have because of Cortland Sutton being the number 1 option. So I'm curious to see, will this Broncos offense change their identity? Will they actually allow Drew Lock to air it out more? And it's not just going to be a team that's going to be relying on using their 2 stud running backs with the strong defense.
It stood out to me, Pat, when I was just looking at targets across the team. And obviously Cortland Sutton had like 126 last year or something like that. But number 2 on the team was Noah Fant. I mean, he's already has some confidence and they have some belief in him to some point. Like, people are projecting a second step. Well, the second step might still be, being that number 2 option for Drew Lock. And I think it's fair to criticize a lot of what John Elway has done since the Peyton Manning era. It's been a lot of stumbles, including hyping up Joe Flacco prior to last season. But, a lot of times when you're talking about decision makers and roster builders across the NFL, so much of it are these like little windows where you get super lucky. I wonder if this is like a little window when the Broncos are getting really lucky, just based on talents that have fallen to them. Bradley Chubb, who, has yet to have a complete full season, it feels like, but there's a lot of potential there with Von Miller on the defensive side of the ball. Someone like Alexander Johnson, who they just plugged into the starting lineup at inside linebacker last year and played fantastic football. Then offense, I mean, it's just loaded with playmakers. Obviously, Cortland Sutton took a massive jump in 2019. Then you add 2 rookies and Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler, and Hamler no one is talking about as one of the best burners in this draft class, and Noah Fant down there working the seam and maybe the most athletic tight end in the NFL. If that is a little lucky window, it's a super difficult division that the Broncos are in, but it would be a very, very fun and enjoyable team if they do hit their stride.
Yeah, I mean, you have to give John Elway credit. And the easy thing to do would have been to lean into Drew Lock's question marks and to say this guy is too risky to build an offense around. We're going to triple down on the run, which they still did. They still got to upgrade. Last year they had a perfectly fine 2-man backfield. Now they're going to have a lot better 2-man backfield. Phillip Lindsay is better as a 1B back than a 1A back. But yeah, instead of playing scared, they know that Drew Lock can make plays down the field. They're leaning into that. It might fail spectacularly, but they're putting him in a position to succeed, and they're putting their offense in position to take a massive step forward over the past few years, and especially the Flacco games last year where it was just basically a Stone Age offense.
Yeah, I liked what Elway did here just because you're giving Drew Lock every chance to succeed. And this year we'll learn if Drew Lock is the answer or not. And if he is the answer, then you invest into the offensive line more next offseason. But no matter what, either the Broncos are going to finish 5-11 and Drew Lock just didn't have it, and then they draft one of these stud quarterbacks coming out, or Drew Lock pieces it together. There's enough around him that they could win 9-10 games, maybe try to compete for a wild card spot. So I think this was the right offseason for the Broncos.
I agree. Okay, one team left. It's all yours, Hayden Winks.
All right. During the Cleveland Browns preview, obviously the big thing was the coaching change. I think that
I'm going to interrupt you. I just don't know why you spent 2,000 words writing about their uniforms in the preview.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Uniforms.
Exactly. Outside of the uniforms, it is the Kevin Stefanski play action thing that is everyone's been talking about. And what that means is Odell Beckham is going to be due for just all of these long touchdowns. I mean, he was 3rd in air yards last year, but he was 23rd in receiving yards. So I think just on talent alone, you should expect Odell to be much higher than that, especially if you look at his deep targets. I did it like this deep target model where Odell Beckham completely underperformed. He was one of the worst deep target receivers in the league. And if you watch in the last 4 or 5 seasons, you know that's just not the case at all. So I think when he's healthy this year, he said he's already back to 100% after having one of his worst surgeries of his life, he said, about this sports hernia surgery, but he's back to 100%. And then the other thing is in the red zone last year, 1 of 11 of his red zone targets went for touchdown. So if we get 80%, 90% of Odell, and if we can get Baker Mayfield to not play like the 29th best quarterback in the NFL, we're going to be looking at Odell Beckham competing for a top 12, top 14, top 15 receiver production. After last year, he was like a wide receiver 30.
I mean, we know, the storyline basically of 2020 for the Browns is going to be how this play action attack unfolds, because Baker Mayfield last year, at least according to Pro Football Focus, was somehow one of the worst play action quarterbacks in the NFL. But Kevin Stefanski on paper is the man to fix that. And that Odell red zone stat you just showed me, that's just disgusting. I mean, have we ever seen a worse red zone offense, or at least worse play calls in the red zone than we got from Freddie Kitchens and the Browns last year? Just out of their depth, no plan, just such a poorly designed offense. It's a terrible cliche. I mean, they really do have nowhere to go but up. And maybe we got two down, two on to the Baker Mayfield hype train after a decent rookie year. But he's still someone. I mean, he's better than the 29th best quarterback in the NFL, like you said. And it's a very easy step forward to spot with the Browns offense this year.
He was the wide receiver 34 in fantasy points per game last year. I mean, that's straight unacceptable for potentially the most talented wide receiver in the NFL. Could not fathom that. Cannot fathom that. We have seen crazier things repeat themselves, though, than the Browns being, just as bad as they were the previous year.
This is about the 19th time the Browns have been saved the past 20 years. So,
right. And it's not like this team is void of questions. They drafted a tackle who I think a lot of us believe is incredibly talented in Jedrick Wills, but he played right tackle at Alabama. They're going to ask him to shift over immediately and play left tackle.
Easy to do in a coronavirus offseason. Very easy.
They played Jack Conklin a ton of money to play right tackle. And, while I think he made some all-pros and stuff like that, if you go and watch him, the Titans surely gave him a bunch of help there on the right side as well. The interior of their offensive line, I think Joe Bitonio is awesome, J.C. Treader. But Baker Mayfield, it all comes back to him. All roads lead to Baker, and he just has to play better because, yes, we can bring up Freddie Kitchens and his play calling in the red zone. We can bring up Odell's injury, right? We can bring up tackle uncertainty from last season. But when it all worked, when it all was perfect in unison, Baker still let this team down. And that is truly unacceptable.
He wasn't good. There's no way to sugarcoat it. He just wasn't good. And he's not the first quarterback that's had a bad setup, but good quarterbacks can overcome bad setups, and Baker Mayfield did not last year. And to keep continuing my super long interruption, another huge question mark for the Browns is Jarvis Landry's hip injury. He's supposedly going to be ready for week 1, but he's coming off a very serious injury.
Yeah, I'm going to ask my younger brother who sat next to Jedrick Wills at an Alabama literature class 2 semesters ago to see how my brother thinks Jedrick Wills can transition to the left side. But I think either way, it's going to be an upgrade at right tackle and at left tackle. Just they brought in so much more talent with Jack Conklin and Jedrick Wills that you have to assume that the offensive line is going to have to play better. And if you are using a lot of play action, which we do expect, the tackles have to hold up on the edge. So they're going to be a key here, but I think that's just only going to be a plus for Odell. It's going to allow him to work downfield more so than ever.
The number one rule in Big J journalism, Hayden, is to not give up your sources. And you just did that. You just did that willy-nilly. Yeah. I mean, Stefanski, he says all the right things, doesn't he, Hayden? I mean, citing play action right, citing, you don't have to have rushing success in order for play action to work. This team is going to have rushing success. I mean, they have the two of the most top 10 talented running backs, I think, in the NFL. So maybe Stefanski is the guy, right? Maybe he is the one that can turn this around. I sure hope so. I do hope so, but I feel like, Pat, we just were here 365 days ago.
And I'll also say with Stefanski is we don't truly know. I mean, Gary Kubiak was kind of like the man behind the curtain in Minnesota last year. We don't truly know how much credit for the Vikings 2019 offense belongs to Kevin Stefanski or Gary Kubiak. I mean, we're pretty sure Stefanski was calling the plays on game day. But, I mean, there was a very heavy Gary Kubiak influence there. And so Stefanski, I mean, this was a very quick promotion for him. So we'll see.
The other thing real quick is just the front office is just significantly better. Like Andrew Berry, I mean, you're talking about a Harvard grad, played football, master's in computer science, has just been surrounding himself with all these brilliant minds. And I just think that he has a much better process. And it seems like when we were at the NFL Combine, when they were at the podium, if you listen to Stefanski and then Andrew Berry right after them, they were saying the exact same thing. And that is so big. You don't see that across the NFL as often as you would think, especially with the Cleveland Browns in the last 25 years, that I think we are finally able to start dipping our toe in the water and finally betting on the Browns with a little more confidence. And I'm not as scared that we're going to have like a 2019 Browns repeat where we're like, what the heck happened?
Doesn't it feel like 10 years ago when John Dorsey got that job and made all those comments of, well, now we're going to get real football players, and just like most of NFL media just like ate it up like it was cereal in the morning. Like they're just like, oh, this guy's just exactly what the Browns need. Well, look where they are right now, back exactly where they were a couple of years ago. And I'm with you, Hayden. Having people with the same goal who don't mind most likely conflict in terms of evaluations and roster building, but understand the right way to build a team. And it certainly seems like the Browns have that. This is their best shot than they've had in a long time. And again, as Austin Hooper,
their best shot since last year. I mean, it's not going to do overboard. and as Austin Hooper creeps towards that like tight end 12, tight end 11 mark, I'm starting to buy him at that price. So okay, now I know you're not into it, Pat. I saw. No, I was going to say I was actually going to like. He's real quick aside. Austin Hooper is one of those people where people staying away from him like with a 10-foot pole where we've already like baked in a ton of regression.
Yep.
And yeah, he's totally acceptable at that ADP.
It is funny that we can talk about the Browns for 5 minutes and not even bring up that they have the highest paid tight end this offseason. That's just like storyline number 5. And that it's typically would be a headliner.
All right. That's going to do it for us. Again, if you enjoyed these mini team previews, maybe you want to check out the whole thing. Go and check out the full team previews up on Rotoworld. We'll continue to post them throughout the weekend. And by the way, starting next week on Tuesday's show and Friday's show, we will go with one burning question for every single NFL team out there, because supposedly training camp is supposed to start on July 28th. And we want to have those questions asked before all these teams report to training camp. So the AFC will be on Tuesday and the NFC will be on Friday. So for Handsome Hayden Weeks, for Patrick Bennett Doherty, up the villa. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.